Hi everybody, I'm Rebecca from the Hornell Area Family YMCA, and I have a quick crafting video for you today. It's a basic sewing technique, sewing on a button. So you can pretty much just plop a button onto a project and sew through it a few times and call it good. But if you want something that's really going to hold up and last, it's a great idea to do them with a little bit of thought as you go along. So the first thing is to figure out the kind of button that you want to use. All of the ones I'm going to be using today, and I'm not using all of these, are flat styles, but it's super important to remember whether or not you have them right side up. So for example, this nice flat kind of pale mauve button, if I flip it over, I suddenly discover that was actually the top side. Some of them really don't matter. There isn't much of a difference between this yellow one, just that the side that's down right now is fully flat and this side is slightly curved, so that lets me know that that's the top of my button. There are two big styles. There's the shank style, which is usually kind of flat or domed on the top, might have decoration to it, and it has a little piece of plastic or metal underneath that you sew onto your project, and I'm not doing that kind today. All of these are the other kind, which are basically flat buttons. They usually have 2 holes or 4 holes. So if you have one that has 4 holes in it like this one does, you get to make a decision about whether you want your thread work to show kind of going crosswise like an X, or if you want 2 parallel rows instead. It's really up to you, but it's pretty simple. So I've threaded up a needle and I've put a knot in so that I'm working with 2 thicknesses of thread. So I've threaded it through, pulled the 2 ends together, and tied a knot in the end. And then working from the underside, having placed my button where I want it, I just come up from the back through one of the holes. The trickiest part for me is always finding where that hole is the first time. So sometimes, there we go, you have to wiggle it around just a little bit. And pull it up so that the knot catches, and go down the other side. Super easy, right? Well, there's one little trick to doing a button that makes them work a little bit better, and that is, well, first of all, don't catch a knot in it as you go. But when you're sewing it on, you don't want to pull it so tight that your button gets really tightly pulled to the fabric, because if you do that over time, yes, the thread will stretch, but it won't be quite as secure because you won't have the opportunity to wrap your threads. And that's the real secret to buttons for me that actually stay on instead of having to redo them a few hundred times. And again, I just have to remember where that spot is. Sometimes you have to turn it over and find your hole again. Goodness gracious, there it is. And how many times do you need to go through? Well, as many as you think it's going to take to secure. I'm using regular sewing thread today. I'm not using the thread that is made for doing buttons. There are some thicker threads out there that are great for attaching buttons because they're a bit heavier duty and you don't have to sew as much. And partly because I'm using this contrasting thread and I want it to show as a contrasting color, I'm going to go ahead and put in a bunch of times. And so then when I get to the end, we're pretty close to the end anyway, I think this is good. Now it's time, I'm going to pull that a little bit tighter just so it's nice and smooth. Now it's time to wrap it. So I'm going to come up from underneath. You can do this as you're sewing it in place. You can come up and do one more stitch, and then when you go back down, oh gosh, you can do this then, or since I'm having trouble getting it to work, I'm just going to come up from the underside through my fabric next to where all my stitches are, and then after I pull it up, I'm just going to wrap around the thread of the button a couple of times. 2, 3 times will do it just fine. And then go back through to the back side again. And then, so this is the back. The most important part, of course, is tie it off with a knot that really counts. So for me, I like to sew into my little mass of thread back here and then take my needle through the loop that I've made and pull to secure. And then if I'm really feeling like I don't trust myself for whatever reason, I can always do that twice. That might be a little bit of overkill, and a lot depends on what you're sewing your buttons to. Oh goodness, did I sure get a snarl on that one. So if I were doing this on a lightweight shirt or a really sheer fabric, I would not go through it that extra time. But this time, I don't really care because it's not going to show. And in fact, I have made such a mess of this, I'm going to have to back that out and tidy it off. And then just clip your threads and you're good to go with a beautifully sewn button. And like I said, if you want to use one that has 4 holes instead, you have the option of doing your threads so that they either crisscross across the middle like this, going basically one side to the other, and then doing the other side like that. Or you could come up on one side and down the other side and make them parallel. Just don't do both. It'll just look like a big mass of thread. But you could go and do this first side and then do this other side and have little parallel lines. It's totally up to you. And of course the orientation of the button can be either set square on or at an angle too. So you have lots of options as well. So those are some basic tips for sewing on a button, and one that will last and not come off your garment or your project. And thanks so much for watching one of our virtual YMCA videos from the Hornell Area Family YMCA.